Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Awakened Minds. Today we have a beautiful guest speaker, Willa Kammerer. Can you please share a little bit about your journey with filmmaking and entrepreneurship and how you became an advocate for women's empowerment and transformation?
Sure. Well, Tiffany, so great to be here. Thank you so much. And great to be here with all of you. I've always been self-employed, ever since right after college. I thought I wanted to start working in public radio. So I went down that path and pretty quickly found myself freelancing in video and film production and built a business around that. And so that's, I'm about a decade and a half into, that career. But as I evolved, things happened in my personal life as well. I had a son who's now 2.5, and I also went through a divorce, which was my choice. And it's been hard to separate the work that I want to do in the world and I feel called to do, from what was going on behind the scenes in my personal life. And so, after a decade and a half of producing, my business being focused on producing content really for clients, I've just kind of come to this place where I've, kind of learned a lot over the years. I've had a lot of stumbles, but I also feel like I have a lot to share. So I'm in the midst of this journey of, pivoting my business from producing content for other people to storytelling and producing content of my own, with my
Mhm.
team as well.
That's amazing. What inspired your transition or your focus from traditional filmmaking to supporting women through significant life transitions and transformations?
Well, I think as I was going through my own journey of deciding to get a divorce, it felt lonely. It didn't feel like there was a lot of support or a lot of, people in my personal circles who I could look to and just have kind of like open, honest conversations about what I was experiencing behind the scenes and just how to navigate it too. So I was grateful to discover resources like podcasts and other things online and audiobooks of, people who were sharing their stories openly and also kind of like tips and tools for how to navigate it. And that just made all the difference for me to know that there were other people who had gone through, what I was going through. And, once the dust settled, it wasn't like this kind of like flip switch. I started kind of like sharing more openly about it, but it wasn't just like, okay, and this is my new kind of like mission and business and kind of like thing I'm here and meant to do. But there was kind of like this period of recalibration after my divorce. The past year, we kind of like separated a couple like 2 years ago and officially divorced like a year ago now. And the past year was just like my life was so filled with just like a lot of like logistical nuts and bolts of building a new life. Like I sold the house that I owned. Also, I was like trying to parent, pretty much solo parent my son. And so I was just kind of like still in kind of like personal transition mode, but moved into a new house over the summer. And once the dust settled on really all the chaos that had been happening in my personal life. Um, and my personal life was for the first time in a long time, just like kind of like settled and peaceful. It just created the space to really kind of have like an aha moment of just, okay, like this is what feels aligned for me, for this new chapter professionally, because I'd been so focused and kind of like distracted, honestly, by my personal life. But the decisions that I made brought my personal life, into a place of much greater alignment, where I am today. And now, now that personal life is settled out, I'm like, okay, what can I break in the business, and in my work life to kind of like create that same deep alignment that I feel to like really close the space between, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and, what I'm doing with my time and how I spend my days. So that's kind of for me, the underpinning thing that I walked away from all of this is just really the power of alignment and personally, professionally, and just wanting to support other mostly women, but it's been interesting the messages. There's men who are resonating and kind of looking and needing the same things in their lives as well. but just like the importance and power of, alignment to really kind of come to a peaceful place in our lives. So that's kind of what I'm passionate about, just sharing and kind of like hopefully giving, other people some tools around.
That's amazing. I'm really hearing the empowerment piece in that out of your transformation, what you've really gained and wanting to share that space of power with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
With this personal transformation, how do you feel that this experience really shaped your current mission and work with, I guess, just overall, I'm hearing like, this empowerment piece, but was there anything else that really came in part of that?
I had to give myself permission that it was okay to do things that I never thought it was okay to, like, it was not part of my story before I knew it had to be part of my story to get a divorce. Like, it was just, wasn't something we did in our family. It was not something that was ever going to be part of my life, until kind of things got so bad that I just like, I finally like came to a place where I just knew I had no other choice to stay in integrity with myself. I surely could have stayed, but I would not be in a place of honesty with myself. And so I, again, back to that kind of feeling of aloneness in it. I think for me, there were some light bulb moments where I finally started to understand, there's some dynamics of emotional abuse in my relationship, but I didn't know about things like that, so I've kind of made it until I started connecting the dots and learning more. And so I've kind of made it my mission as I'm really building the plane as I'm flying it. This is absolutely kind of a young, kind of pivot and venture. But as I'm building out, what my vision for it is and kind of like what the themes are and the story that I'm sharing and the tools that I'm sharing, just helping, just being really honest and trying to kind of break down those barriers of kind of what's okay to share so that hopefully, kind of like people can just find themselves, in stories. And it's not just about me. I'm really passionate about, and I feel like there's a deep need for community around all of this. And so one of the foundational things that I'm building is a private membership community where people who are in all stages of, kind of life transitions and transformations can come and find a place to relate to each other and support each other. Because for me, it's a lot of people who are coming to me who a lot of what I'm sharing right now is around my divorce because it's a pretty fresh transition in my life. But my personal theory and personal experience has been that, if something is out of alignment in one of the kind of key domains of life, be it close personal relationship, marriage, or career, or even, wellness, or finances, just if one of these kind of like key areas of life is not aligned, then like nothing's going to feel really good. And so, the community that I'm building and, the kind of safe space that I want to create for people is a place to kind of find those parallels and support each other. Maybe someone's like really got the relationship piece worked out, but they're like not psyched about where they are professionally. But someone else in the community, is in a great place professionally, but really is working on the relationship and finding those points of being able to support each other and just kind of like see that we're all really on this journey together because we are. And I am 100%, on this journey, as well.
Mhm. I love that, bringing in this element of humanity, right? We're all gonna
Absolutely.
piece that we're working on developing or striving to expand or shift and change or transform. And I love that you're working on building this community for that because it's really needed, especially in a world where there is a lot of isolation with just the way how we kind of live from, no longer the community of hunter gatherers, we're very much isolated. And I love that you're really bringing that into a space where it's, global and it could be used in many areas.
Yeah, one thing on that actually, as it has been, one of the first places that, and, where we actually initially connected, one of the first places that I've really been kind of sharing my story openly around this is Instagram. And it's just been amazing and so interesting, the messages that I've been getting from women, from men as well, but a lot of women, from kind of like cultural backgrounds where divorce is definitely not okay, from like a kind of cultural and societal, standpoint, women, Middle Eastern background. Someone wrote me from the Philippines. I did not know divorce is actually illegal in the Philippines. It's one of the only two countries. So there definitely is like a global and international dimension to this, which I think is really powerful. And I think just like the more we can begin, back to kind of like my own journey and having those resources of people, like these stories of just like transformation, these stories of thriving, these stories of like, yes, it was hard, but like I'm so glad that I did the hard thing so that I could like have the good thing, which is kind of like like a more peaceful, life on the other side. And I think just trying to kind of be an example of that, but also highlight and share other examples and kind of like create community around people who are just like a couple of steps ahead to just like provide that hope.
Yeah, hope, and I'm even hearing inspiration, that
Mm-hmm.
was so powerful to be able to have somebody in a network near you who's gone through it, who's experienced it already, and they can lead the way of, hey, these are some of the steps that helped me. So that really helps pull them forward.
Yeah, it's like a combination of kind of like, like I'm an entrepreneur too, so I'm always, it's like what's the kind of like nuts and bolts. It's kind of like the, the kind of like spiritual, kind of like the heart side, but also like the spiritual kind of like heart side of things, but also the kind of like nuts and bolts, like tactical, and I think that's where some people get caught up as well. It's like, because it is hard, like going through any life transition whether it's like a kind of like major career pivot change, moving to a new location, or kind of like deciding that you're gonna end a relationship. They're all like it's hard. There's a lot of like breaking and rebuilding that needs to happen. Does it mean it's not worth it?
Mhm.
No, but it just means that you kind of have to like slog through a period of kind of like chaos to kind of like get to the other side.
Yeah. And that chaos piece is, that even speaking to that, because some people feel like they're stuck in that and that's going to last forever, or they can't get out of it. And just that's part of the journey within itself. And I like how you're pointing that out too. You have to go through that and move into those uncomfortable, challenging spaces. Because when you're on the other side of it, it's just amazing.
That kind of like alludes a little bit to, we were talking a little offline about this kind of like aligned transformation framework that I have developed that is kind of like the underpinning of everything that I'm building right now, from kind of like the community and digital courses and retreats and coaching, through my personal experience. It really is this combination of kind of like heart, and tactics. And it's become my mission to try to kind of like help support people through that journey, like with a framework that can help take through the same steps that helped get me, moving through the process and not just like stuck in this point of like, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel good. Like, oh, I think making a change is going to be hard, but like, how do you actually like go from like, this doesn't feel good to like, this feels a lot better and like slog through the process. So I could walk you through kind of like those steps
Yeah,
if you're
please. I was about
interested.
to ask if you could share a little bit of the steps.
Sure. Yeah. So, and it's really kind of been something that I've kind of like developed through, okay, what was the process that I followed, that kind of like got me here to the other side, like pretty quickly. Like I decided, my son's 2.5. I decided, I was consulting with a lawyer, when he was like 3, 4, 5 months old, and I kind of like made the decision, when he was like, and announced it to my ex-husband when he was about 8 months old. And, kind of like, there's been a lot of kind of like transformation in my life, like between in a relatively short time, especially considering that I've been like juggling a toddler along the way. So I just, people stay stuck in, if we're talking about relationships, people stay stuck in relationships, the messages I get, 20, 30 years, and are finally pulling themselves out of it. And I just like, I want, if I can do anything, to kind of like help make people feel like they have options and kind of like their own personal power to be able to kind of like move themselves from like the feelings of like this isn't aligned to like, okay, I'm moving into like a much more aligned place. So that's like a preamble to kind of like the background of this. So the first step of it's a 7-step framework that I kind of work through. And the first step is feeling and assessing. So just like really kind of like getting in touch with your body, like with the feelings in your body. For me, there was a lot of just kind of like sense of disconnect, kind of like between like what was in my heart and like the reality that I was living. So just kind of like some tools, to kind of like help people like get grounded in their body. And then also like kind of like stepping back and looking at your life from like 30,000 feet, like, cause we get so into the kind of like the minutia of our circumstances, our details. And it's kind of like, well, other people can like make this kind of change, but my situation is too unique. It's too complicated. But like when we can kind of like remove ourselves from kind of like some of that like specific circumstances, and then it can just kind of like help just provide another perspective. So for me, it was thinking about looking from the outside in at my life, thinking of my son being, maybe like 12, 13 and going on a walk and, having him be like, having him questioning like why I put up with the dynamics that I was putting up with, in my relationship. And like that kind of like having that perspective, like helped flip a switch for me to be able to just feel much more conviction that I needed. Like if I couldn't do it for myself, I had to do it for him, but it could also be like for the version of yourself, in the future. So it doesn't have to be for another person. You don't have to have like a child that you're, kind of like in play. You can just do it for another version of yourself. So so the first kind of like this feeling and assessing, like that kind of like stepped back kind of assessing. And then from there, I think where a lot of people get tripped up is like going into like, okay, so how do I actually do it? Like I it seems really complicated. So I'm just gonna like, it was an idea, but like it's too complicated, it's too hard, I'm not gonna do it. But my perspective is like, no, that's when you need to like, as you're like rooted in yourself and feeling really clear, on what you're feeling and like what you're, that's when you make the decision. That's when you kind of like come to this point of like conviction and just like make the decision and then worry about like the how later. But like if you can kind of like just come to that kind of like decisive moment, I think that's like the powerful time to do it before we like get in the way of ourselves. And then from there, really kind of like building up the inspiration of it, envisioning, spending some time like envisioning what's possible, for this, new reality, like what's on the other side, what's the light at the end of the tunnel. Because I think if you can have that high level vision, then there's a way, like the doors start to open and like the answers start to come, once you've decided and you're kind of envisioning what's possible. From there, then kind of going into the researching and, the kind of like strategy phase of like, okay, so like, so you want to get a divorce, like, how do you do it in your state? Call the lawyer, have some consultations, like start to look at, the financial picture of things, but once you're there, you're like so bought into kind of like the future that is already yours, it kind of like ties into, kind of like the power of just like envisioning manifestation, if you just, kind of like cultivating that kind of like positive vision, feeling the feelings of it already being yours, then it's like, you know, you'll figure out the strategy. You're just much more empowered and inspired to want to get to the other side because you already see it. And then, once you kind of, because I think the strategy piece is important too, like especially as women, it's like a lot of, I was lucky, things were a little simplified in my, you know, for my divorce because I actually was, the breadwinner. And so like I knew what our finances were. Like I was already like, kind of like providing for us. So, but there's a lot of women in a situation kind of like financial disempowerment, in relationships and, financial abuse as well. And so the kind of like the strategy before kind of like announcing to the world, or announcing to someone, that you're going to make this big change, just making sure you're protected in that, I think is pretty important. So that's why the kind of like research and strategy piece kind of comes before the kind of like the actual execution, of the change. So that's kind of the aligned change. And then, when we were first in our conversation, after making, a significant change, whether it's, just, deciding to leave a relationship or make a big career change, there's this kind of necessary period of like, it's not just like, okay, and like doors open and here's your new life. Like here it is, like shiny and new. Like there's this period of recalibration, and I think this kind of like necessary period of like you're still kind of like in a chrysalis, kind of like a little bit hibernating, just kind of like getting your bearings, in your new reality. Kind of like practically for me, that looked like consulting with a financial advisor, kind of like getting all my like, accounts kind of transferred over and so selling my house, moving, buying a new house, like just like all these kind of just like logistical pieces, but there's also an emotional piece as well, of just I think also just kind of like recovery, like what does it feel like, to not be, if you're in a job, like what does it feel like to not have to kind of like be psyching yourself up for this thing that you really don't want to do every day, or like what does it feel like to like just not have kind of like just hurtful dynamics, as a constant, like who are you when you're not on defense all the time? And I think that can kind of take some time to kind of like learn to breathe again. And then, the final phase is this kind of like expansion and thriving, kind of like there's no kind of like X amount of time, of kind of like recalibration. I think you just kind of like know, and I think for me, like once I kind of like really got the kind of personal side of things kind of finally settled in after a good like year, then it's like, oh, what do I really want to do? And I think that's where we can really, begin to dial in, like, what does it really mean to thrive? Like, what do you really want for your life? Like, what does that look like? What does that look like on the like health side? What does that look like on the financial side? What does that look like on the personal life side? Kind of like the full picture. And for me, this isn't just like a kind of like one and done like framework and system, but it's really like it's all about alignment, and it's kind of like committing kind of like to a life of alignment in all domains. And it's kind of as in my personal life, like once my personal life settled out, it was like, okay, like now I really want to get like my work life like into a kind of like a greater place of alignment. It's kind of like, think of it as kind of like this alignment pendulum, like one thing like swings into really like strong alignment in one area of our life, and then like that enables us to like feel and look at other areas of our life, to reflect on them in different ways, and kind of like go deeper on that journey there. So to me, it's kind of like this, like just lifelong kind of like process that, we can kind of return to, and really that kind of becomes instinctive as well.
Yeah, this is such a powerful framework. I really love hearing the alignment piece that's so strong in this, because what's coming to me as you're sharing this is so many people in the world feel like they can't step into that alignment with themselves or live the life that they really want to live because of some outside factor. So I love hearing these steps and how you've got resourcing in there, because that's so important. A lot of people may know what needs to change, just don't know how to do it. So
Mhm.
this framework is just phenomenal to hear, and I appreciate you sharing it, because, just hopefully other people as they listen to it can apply some of that or reach out to you and understand how to really work through each of those stages with wherever they're at in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you're kind of touching on that permission piece, people like feeling like, oh, like I know, I feel like I want to make a change, but I don't like feel like it's okay to, and I think that's also kind of gets into, part of my work is, I'm like passionate about alignment and empowering people, to feel like that's possible. But what I've realized is like there's an earlier piece too, kind of like, how do you even know, when it's time to make a change in your life? So a lot of the kind of like content I've been sharing and trying to kind of like open up around, and just kind of like examine my own kind of like process around is like what are those signs, that something is out of alignment? Because it's like great, like you don't even know like you need alignment, like if you're just kind of like so in the trenches of just like not feeling great. So I think, the more we can also kind of like in this space kind of talk about things in different ways and try to kind of like tap into, what people need at different stages of the journey. Cause I didn't know I needed alignment, until I was kind of on the other side and I was like, oh, that's what was missing. Like, that's what was missing. But I wasn't like walking around, being like, I'm so out of alignment, I was just like, the problem is me, like the problem is me. Like, I'm not like peaceful enough. I'm not like writing enough gratitude lists for like my circumstance, all these things. But the reality was like, it wasn't me, it was my circumstances that were out of alignment, and I needed to change those. Like, no amount of, it's kind of off on a tangent, but I also talk about like micro alignment and macro alignment. Like, to me, kind of like, it can be tempting to like, when there's like, it just feels bad when there's like something big in your life that's like not great, whether it's a relationship or a job, whatever it is. But I think like as a society too, like we're into the kind of like quick fixes, and we're always looking for like the next like hack or thing that's gonna like get us to that kind of like better place like quickly, whether it's like the next diet or like even like the green smoothie or the glass of wine, whatever the thing is, that's gonna kind of, and those can like make us feel like better in the moment. But like, and I did it too. Like, I was just like very like always trying to kind of like fix myself, but like no amount of kind of like micro alignment, kind of like trying to kind of like fix the little things are going to like solve the big alignment thing, if something big is out of whack. So there's definitely, but then, to really thrive, like that's where like the micro alignment piece comes in, like, because that's where you really can kind of like dial in, kind of like getting yourself to kind of like a really strong place.
I'm glad that you touch base on those micro and macro aspects because, if we're looking at even daily habits versus where we are and where we want to go, those sometimes those little things add up to the big things. We can't change sometimes the big things without, or, we have to change the big things in order to do the little things. So I love how you touch base that they feed and fuel each other. We have to be aware and aligned to both of them in order for the whole system to function.
Absolutely. Like, I know I would not be in like as good feeling place as I am right now to be having this conversation if I hadn't woken up, meditated for 15 to 20 minutes before I looked at my phone, in bed, first thing I do before I go to my son, before I look at my phone. Like, I just know that I need, that. And meditation is something I've dipped in and out of at different times. I usually kind of go on these like big, meditate for like a year or two at a time. And then like, I'll just kind of fall off the wagon for like 6 months, like when I have a baby or whatever. But, it is something that I have like kind of consistently returned to. And my matcha. I used to drink coffee and now I kind of like accidentally switched over to matcha and I'm like obsessed with it. But like it just gives that kind of like little like calm buzz that just like makes my morning like a little bit better. And movement, those are kind of like some of the kind of like key things that like if I didn't do and take a shower, big fan of showers. If I didn't do those things, like I would kind of feel like just not fully present, not like attuned to be able to like have this conversation. And that's, to me, that's micro alignment. Those are like the micro alignment things that I need, kind of like on a day-to-day basis. And those can kind of shift over time, kind of like depending on like where you are in life. And I'm always kind of like adding and subtracting like little things to kind of like those routines that I know for me, kind of like keep me kind of in a kind of day-to-day aligned state. So yeah, like you said, like there's an interplay between both of them. And I think also like sometimes people underestimate like the kind of like importance of, I was having this back and forth message, with someone on Instagram, and, he's going through a lot in his personal life, and, but he's like, I'm also working on like diet and exercise, because like that can have a huge impact on like just your mental state, and how you're feeling. So I think it's also the power of kind of like dialing in like your sleep, your diet, movement, mindfulness, all those things, is also not to be underestimated for just like the power of that to really kind of like shift, like to say shift the molecules, and just kind of like change your state.
Oh, 100% agree. I could talk for hours on a soapbox about the importance of sleep and nutrition, and I'm glad you touched base on that because it really does affect our overall mental health, our well-being. If just our nutrition and sleep is out of alignment, then those simple little tweaks, can change and transform so many other areas.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like I feel like a new person. Like if I don't get a good night's sleep, I like feel terrible. You can like really truly feel like a new person, through some of these things.
It's amazing. How do you find a balance running this amazing business and building this new vision? And I guess where do you find that balance and the challenges of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as an entrepreneur, like I tend to be kind of like all in on things, like and I just want it like now, and the process of building things is like it takes time, and it takes consistency and it takes, just kind of like keeping doing things, and believing in it, before you start to kind of see results. I do have a couple of people on my team, which I definitely wouldn't be able to kind of on the kind of like client business side of things, which are definitely like hugely supportive. And that was, a benefit. I really started building more support around me, when I was pregnant, because I was like, okay, know I have to keep this business going, like even after I just was able to step back personally for a good 6 months or so, but my team was able to kind of like support me and kind of like keep things going during that time with a lot less kind of like input from me. So kind of in the same way, like we're all working on all of this together, but that has given me, kind of like they're much more kind of like day to day involved in a lot of the kind of like nuts and bolts on the client side of things, while I just kind of like I'm just like really trying to kind of like carve out, as much kind of like focused, space as I can to build all these things. I've been taking in, I've been a little bit of kind of like a, resources junkie in the past like 4 months, as I've, the amount of like digital courses and, mentorship and coaching, that I've invested in over the past several months is significant. But I also, I'm just not in a place in my life, I'm a single mom and I am, my son is with me 100% of the time. And so I have a really big why for why I'm doing all of this. For myself, I'm passionate about these things and it feels like my mission to align my kind of like vocation, with, kind of like what's in my heart, that I want to get out there. But I also, from kind of like a life logistical standpoint, I don't have kind of like a, like a sugar daddy who's like supporting the whole vision. Like I have to, figure out how to make it all work from a financial standpoint as well. But, you know, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm passionate about that piece as well.
Yeah, so basically, I'm hearing that community piece that you started with of just having that community around you, the importance of it, and how that carries you through things, not just, how you're talking about implementing it for other people, but just in your own personal life.
Absolutely, and they, it's a couple of amazing women and, that just also like the mentors that I've been working with. It's like we're all just like in these just kind of like different steps of the journey, and kind of like all have like different pieces of the puzzle, kind of like we all have different pieces of the puzzle, kind of like figured out and are just kind of like supporting each other, along that journey. And I just think, the more, as you said, we can kind of like be vulnerable and human and just kind of like honest about where we are. Just a little bit kind of back to that, like it's so interesting how Instagram has actually like my entire relationship with Instagram has been reframed through this experience. For years, I it was a place to me, it just represented the kind of duality of the life that I was living, the lack of alignment. I literally felt like I was living two lives, the kind of like reality of like my internal space and kind of like behind the scenes in my home. And then, kind of like what I presented to the world, kind of both professionally and just that I kind of had it all together, and, on Instagram, I still would do, that like, oh, happy, here, pregnant, bought a house, like all these things. Like I was checking all the boxes and Instagram kind of represented like that kind of like shiny place where I like felt like like I showed up and I, said the right things, but it was like this feeling of like, are they gonna figure me out? Like it just doesn't like it just didn't feel authentic, and the fact that like so I had to work through a lot, to kind of like begin showing up in the way that I'm showing up there now, like really just kind of like sharing my experience, sharing my story, sharing kind of like what's on my mind and what I wish I had heard, at that point. And just begin to like really feel like it's a community there, a community of people kind of all on this journey. And so it's just been really interesting to kind of like have that shift in perspective, like specifically on that platform as well.
I think that's so important just in general with social media. A lot of times I feel just we all get caught up in this picture perfect life, but none of us have that. Nobody. We are all having a human experience, and to really bring that back into framework, reality, helping people understand that, I think is really important to realize we are all in this journey of kind of stumbling along the way and finding our pieces and putting together the community and aligning these different areas. And so I love that you really pointed that out because I think that's something really important. It's a very strong message that I want to kind of shout out to of just like we're all like working on something and that doesn't make you any less of a person. That makes you a perfectly perfect human being. So I love that you pointed that out.
And I think it's really like a superpower too, like not like of me, but like just in general, like when people can kind of like, I think I also like had this revelation like pretty early in like it was before I really started sharing openly, but I was just like, this is terrifying, but I really feel like the more I give, like in the sense of like the more I share, like the more I open up, the more I'm vulnerable, even though that feels like the most terrifying thing in the world, like the more I'll get back from it. And I think that has like even just like a couple days ago, I posted this reel that I just like, I still am like, oh, that feels kind of vulnerable, it's like what emotional abuse felt like, and but like the messages that I've gotten like are like, thank you for sharing this. It's so hard to put words to it. Like this is like putting to words what I've been experiencing. It's like, it's gotten a ton of saves and it's kind of like, I don't know, like I just think there's power, power and kind of like opening up, sharing, kind of like, and just being honest about kind of like kind of like reality of the journey. And it's not always pretty.
Hmm. Yeah, and back to what you're talking about, it helps people realize that they're not alone in that. A lot of times back to that isolation piece we were talking about, people feel that they're alone in that journey where, you shared your experience too. You felt alone in what you're going through and realizing,
Yeah.
hey, I'm not. And there's so much more people going through things I can connect with. And again, bringing that community piece, I just love it so much, is that
Yeah.
bringing that back into our society is so important that that space to share and realize we are not alone and we're also all working through something and there's nothing wrong with that.
Definitely. That like playing around. This might not be 100% the final name, but I think it's the final name of the community is going to be Aligned to Rise, which I really like
Ooh,
because it
love
kind
it.
of is like this transformation. Yeah.
Oh, I got chills. I love the name of it. Well, as we kind of wrap up for today, where can listeners find more information about your resources, your coaching services, and just any upcoming events or anything that you might have going on?
Sure. Probably easiest. Well, I'm on Instagram, which is where we connected. Willa Kammerer. My last name's a little bit. It's Willa, Willa, Kammerer, Kammerer. So I'm on Instagram just under my name. And then probably the easiest, I have a resource, if what we've been talking about resonates. I'd love to share, with your listeners. It's just a checklist, 10 signs, from confusion to clarity, 10 signs you might need to make a change in your life. That's at 10 signs checklist, the number 10 signs checklist.com. And that, will get you on my email list and, so that we can stay connected. That's probably kind of like the easiest place. Plus also, if, you've been listening to this and just kind of like want to dig in a little bit, has also a little bit more of kind of like my personal process and story in that as well. So yeah, I'd love to, reach out, send me a message on Instagram, send me an email. I'd love to connect. And I just like, I'm here to support you on your journey and, I'm on this journey with you.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, everybody check her out on Instagram. Phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing everything and that you've gone through and the steps that you have for transformation to possibly help others. So I hope everybody gets some insight out of this and thank you for joining us.